Alerted by an anonymous phone call just after 8 p.m. on March 3, 1967, police in Rockford, Illinois, find two teenage boys in a park pavilion with gunshot wounds. Though little sign of a struggle is apparent, one boy is dead and the other soon dies in the hospital. Welcome to an audio version of an original article by Kathi Kresol, operator of Haunted Rockford Paranormal Events, Rockford, Illinois. This audio presentation is entitled Loss of Innocence. The story originally appeared in the book Murder Mayhem in Rockford, Illinois by Kathi Kresol, 2015. This audio article was produced by Thomas Saunders for Haunted Rockford. Some people call it woman's intuition. Some may dismiss the notion. No matter what you may believe, the fact is that on that day, Mrs. Mullendore was worried. She had a bad feeling all day and just could not shake it. It was March 1967. Winter had not loosened its grasp completely, but March 3rd was full of the promise of warmer days. Mrs. Mullendore spent the day in typical fashion. She worked around the house and made an early dinner. Her son Wayne got home from school around 3:45 p.m. He was a 7th grader at Wilson Middle School. Mrs. Mullendore asked Wayne to run to the grocery store for a few things that she needed to finish dinner. The family was going to attend church that evening, and she was in a hurry to get the dinner on the table. The family ate dinner, and then Wayne asked his father for permission to spend the evening with his cousin Ronald Johnson, whom everyone called Chuck. Mr. Mullendore gave his consent. He dropped Wayne off around 6:30 p.m. at Chuck's house on Elm Street, promising to pick him up around 9 p.m. The rest of the family went to church. Later, Mrs. Mullendore was sitting with an elderly friend watching television. She still had that nagging feeling from earlier, the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. It was while she was with her friend that she heard the first report of breaking news. There were two teenage boys found at Levings Lake Park. Mrs. Mullendore mentioned her feeling of dread to her husband when he picked her up. Her husband just brushed off her concerns. They stopped at the Johnsons' house to get Wayne and were surprised when Chuck's father said the boys weren't there. They had gone to visit with a friend and hadn't made it back yet. Mr. Mullendore didn't say anything to his wife, but his apprehension was growing as well. They went home and put the other children to bed. They were watching the news when the story was announced again, this time with more details. Two teenage boys had been discovered at Levings Lake Park. The report described what the boys were wearing and mentioned a scar on the stomach of one of the boys. The Mullendores didn't say a word to each other. They were both remembering that day 10 years prior, when Wayne was 4. Another cousin and Wayne were playing in the kitchen of the Mullendore house. The cousin was crawling under the table when his foot got caught on the cord of the coffee pot, overturning the pot and splashing hot coffee onto Wayne's stomach. The burn left a distinctive scar. Mr. Mullendore walked to the phone and slowly dialed the telephone number of Rockford Memorial Hospital. The person on the phone asked Mr. Mullendore a few questions and offered to have a police squad car pick him up to bring him to the hospital. Mr. Johnson, Chuck's father, was also starting to worry. He sent Chuck's elder brother to friend Sandy Kane's house around 9:30 p.m. Sandy told the brother that the boys had called her earlier and she said they could visit her after 7:30 p.m. at the house where she was babysitting. The boys promised they would come, but they never arrived. No one knew for sure what happened that night. The police only knew that a phone call came in at 8:16 p.m. It sounded like a young woman's voice. The caller stated that two boys had been shot at Levings Lake. The police showed up in record time, arriving at 8:18 p.m. The first officers on the scene were Sheriff's deputies Frank Englund Jr. and Samuel Ritter. Both officers were understandably on edge when they arrived at the scene. The night was foggy, and the fog hung low over the whole area that night, adding to the eeriness. The fog dimmed the single light that shone from the pole by the shelter. Englund reported that he covered Ritter as he ran to the pavilion. "We pointed our spotlight into the pavilion and saw two bodies against the west wall," Englund said. The officers were so busy trying to get help for the unconscious boys that they didn't really notice how young the boys were. They did notice that one boy had his hands behind him and the other had his hands in his pockets. They were both face up and the pools of blood were still forming when they were found. The ambulance arrived and the boys were taken to Rockford Memorial Hospital. The looks on the faces of the officers and the paramedics said it all. They all knew they would be investigating homicides. Chuck Johnson was pronounced dead when the ambulance arrived, but Wayne was still fighting for his life. It must have been very chaotic in the emergency room. They had two unidentified boys, one dead and the other dying. They didn't know who their parents were or why the boys had been out at the lake. Wayne Mullendore would die before his father reached the hospital. Meanwhile, two families were growing more frantic as the evening wore on. Victor Johnson was Chuck Johnson's father. He worked for the Time Screw and Manufacturing Company. When his elder boy finally returned home, the news had started, and Victor Johnson heard the same descriptions that Mr. Mullendore had. Another squad car was sent out for the Johnson family. In an article written much later, in 1973, Victor Johnson spoke of what it was like that evening. The first table he came to held the body of his nephew, Wayne. He went on to describe the horrific scene. I almost passed out, knowing somewhere in that room was my son. Moving further into the room, the sight that greeted me was one which will never leave me. My son was lying on one of the tables with a bullet wound in his stomach. I did not know at the time that he had a hole in his head also. The police worked the case around the clock and were at Levings Lake in full force, trying to piece together what happened. Sheriff Herbert Brown was leading the investigation and was quoted in the Morning Star newspaper as believing the case was premeditated and that it may have been the work of a juvenile because it appears to have been an execution done with ceremony. The police had a theory that someone met the boys, forced them into a car, and brought them to the lake. The boys were made to kneel at the back wall of the stone shelter and were each shot once in the head. After they fell, they were each shot in the stomach. It must have been terrifying for the two boys all alone in the deserted park, with a person holding a gun. The clues were few and included some threads found outside the shelter that might have indicated a scuffle. But there were no other signs of a fight. It appeared to the police that the boys did not fight with their attacker before being shot. This led the police to believe there might have been more than one person involved. The police also found part of a rubber heel inside the shelter. It was not from either of the victims' shoes. These items were sent to the State Mobile Laboratory that was brought from Joliet to assist with the investigation. The police were also working the phone call they received that had reported the murders. They implored whoever called in to please help us by calling back and giving more information. They were relatively certain that the caller must live outside the city limits because they dialed the sheriff's office and not the Rockford Police Department. A $2,500 reward was offered by the families in the newspaper to help generate leads in the case. The Rockford Police Department was assisting in the case by conducting a door-to-door search in the area of the West State and Johnson Streets. This was the area where the police believed the boys were met by the person in the car. The papers from March 4th were also filled with students, teachers, and neighbors remembering the two boys. All of the stories described how kind both of the boys were. Both boys were described as soft-spoken, polite, and well-behaved. Wayne's mother stood in his room filled with sports trophies and talked of how he was so hard-working on his paper route and always willing to help his parents around the house. He played baseball, basketball, and bowling. Chuck's neighbors spoke of him shoveling their snow or mowing their yards. His best friend was Chuck Lathan, whose parents spoke highly of Chuck Johnson. Johnson was quite a baseball player and was scheduled to be the head pitcher for the Sports Center team in the Bronco Baseball League that spring. Police were able to put together a timeline of the boys' activities for the evening. Chuck Johnson's mom sent the boys to the Pojo supermarket on West State Street to buy some sandwich meat for Mr. Johnson's lunch the next day. The boys stopped at Mock Drugstore, also on West State Street, to phone Sandy Kane, who invited them to the house where she would be babysitting. The boys stopped at Chuck's house to drop off the sandwich meat around 7:30 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw them. The call notifying the police of the shootings came in at 8:16 p.m. Police were desperate to find out what happened in that 45-minute window of time. The woman who hired Sandy Kane to babysit Mrs. Donaldson stated that she was running a little late that night and left to pick Sandy up at 7:30 p.m. She noticed a car parked on the wrong side of the road just down from her house. When she returned with Sandy, the car was gone. The news of the shooting spread like wildfire. NBC and CBS sent reporters and cameramen, and the local newspaper reported that it received hundreds of calls from newspapers from New York to the West Coast. Wayne and Chuck were buried on March 7, 1967 at Willwood Burial Park. Over 700 people attended the funerals and graveside service, and over 100 vehicles made the long, silent drive from the Julian Poorman Funeral Home down West State Street to the burial site. According to the funeral home staff, this was the biggest service they ever facilitated. The boys' matching silver caskets were draped with flower arrangements of red roses and white lilies. Over 100 other plants were sent to honor the cousins. Their families stood by the coffins during the ceremony. Many in the crowd were classmates of the boys, and their principal and counselor attended to represent the West Middle School teachers. Their tear-streaked faces spoke of their sorrow. It was during the solemn ceremony that the first whispers were heard. These whispers proclaimed that Sheriff Herb Brown was, at that very moment, questioning someone for these brutal murders. John Wesley Williams Jr., 17 years old and black, had been arrested as a suspect for the killings. Williams's father had purchased a .22 caliber handgun for him the day before the murders. John Williams Sr., a former Winnebago County Sheriff's deputy, owned several other guns. The police confiscated Mr. Williams's guns, but the new gun was not found. John Wesley Williams Jr. had been recently found innocent of a sniper wounding charge. The shooting of the 15-year-old victim had taken place just a few months prior to this case. He was also awaiting a trial on a reckless conduct charge involving another sniper incident. Williams had an alibi for the night of the murders. He was married to a 16-year-old girl named Linda. She said that Williams was home with her having dinner at the time of the shootings. Police felt that the other evidence in the case would prove that Linda was lying about Williams's whereabouts. On the same day the arrest was announced, there was another article from the mayor stating that everyone must uphold the law. He pleaded with the readers to let the police and the courts handle the case. Obviously, there were concerns about vigilante justice. The Chamber of Commerce added another $1,000 to the $2,500 reward, already pledged as an incentive for witnesses to come forward. A grand jury hearing was held, and the jurors felt there was enough evidence against John Wesley Williams Jr. to hold him for trial. The grand jury heard from 9 witnesses. The last one was John Moore, 18, an acquaintance of Williams. Moore testified that he saw Williams on March 1, 1967. Williams showed him a revolver that his father had just purchased for him and made the statement that he wanted to go out and shoot someone. This was the day before Wayne and Chuck were shot. Another witness was a gun store owner from the Rockford discount sales on East State Street who stated that Williams had visited his store on Tuesday, February 28th, but he was just looking. On Wednesday, March 1st, Williams returned and brought his father. They looked at a few guns and decided on the Rome RG 24 .22 caliber revolver. Police declared that both the Williams men denied owning a .22 caliber revolver. After the police revealed the statement from the gun shop owner, Williams Sr. said he had not seen the gun since he bought it for his son. John Wesley Williams Jr.'s trial began in June 1968. State's attorney William R. Nash was the prosecutor for the case. The defense attorneys were New York attorney Seymour Friedman and Rockford attorney Sam Dean. The jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men. The judge was Chief Justice Albert O. Sullivan. Since the case had such massive media coverage, the judge ordered the jury sequestered. They stayed at the National Motor Inn, now the location of a senior citizen high-rise apartment building. They were not allowed to look at magazines or newspapers, and the televisions were removed from their rooms. One of the witnesses called was the owner of the Rockford Discount Sales, James Annist. His testimony was the same as it had been before the grand jury. He sold a gun to John Wesley Williams that was the same caliber as the murder weapon. Another witness, James Rose, 17, who worked as a bag boy at the Pojo supermarket on West State Street, testified that he saw a black male in the store at the same time that Wayne and Chuck were there. The main incriminating evidence was found right behind John Williams's house. Some men who knew Williams told the police that he had a target practice area behind his house. When the police followed through with the tip, they discovered slugs that Williams shot from the .22 caliber revolver. The bullets that were recovered from the autopsies were in good enough condition to be compared with those found at the house. They matched. The trial lasted for 4 days, and the jury found John Wesley Williams Jr. guilty of the murder of the two boys. Linda Williams, the 16-year-old wife of the murderer, attended the sentencing. The couple lived with Williams's parents. They were helping Linda take care of her and John Wesley's baby. The child was only 1 month old when Williams was arrested for the murders. Chief Justice O'Sullivan sentenced John Wesley Williams to serve 90 to 100 years for each of the two murder convictions to be served concurrently. He would be eligible for parole after serving 11 years and 3 months. Williams was to be delivered to the Illinois State Penitentiary in Joliet, Illinois. When he heard the sentence from the judge, Williams stated, "That's all right with me." He was allowed to visit with his wife for a couple of minutes before being led away. John Wesley Williams Jr. was born in Rockford on June 17, 1949. He grew up here, attended school here, and went to high school at Auburn High. He left school after 10th grade. He was employed as a spinner for custom metals. Williams was just an average guy. So what would make this young man who had a job, had just gotten married and had a new baby, commit this horrible, senseless crime? That question has never been answered. In July 1972, just over 5 years after the murders, Williams was serving his sentence in Menard Maximum Security Prison in Chester, Illinois. He proclaimed his innocence from the very beginning. On July 4, 1972, Williams hung himself in his cell with the cord from the headphones provided by the prison. He was 23 years old. In December 1973, Victor Johnson, father of Chuck Johnson and uncle of Wayne Mullendore, wrote a letter to the editor of a local newspaper. In this letter, Mr. Johnson told of how difficult it was to live without his son and how much he missed him. He also spoke of the man who killed his son. "The killer of my son is dead now, and I feel better, knowing I will not have to kill him. This Christmas season is a lonely one for me, and it probably will be for the rest of my life. Some people say, you will get over it, but they don't know the agony my wife and I go through every year. People say it is good to talk about it, but who is there to go to? No one I know has gone through this, and we have to carry this burden alone. But with God's help, we will make it. I ask all the people to pray for us to help us to carry this burden. And I know that the family of this killer is in the same position that we are, having Christmas without their son. We offer our prayers to them, and maybe some way God can comfort both families. We are praying for them." This is the end of our audio article. Thanks for listening.